Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, is with us to throw light on this story. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for being with us. Now, to what extent does the renewed US-Ukraine partnership actually impact geopolitical tensions, particularly in the areas controlled by Russia?
So I think this deal is very significant for three specific reasons. The United States was very keen that this deal be done, and initially the Ukrainians were not as keen about it. But the fact that this has been done means that the United States is now more engaged in Ukraine, and in some way this would also support the kind of activities that Europe had wanted the US to do. The second thing that I think comes out of this is that there is an economic content that looks further into the reconstruction aspects of it, and it sends a message to the parties that are engaged in war, that is Europe and Russia in particular. Okay. And I think then the third aspect that comes in because of this particular deal, and that is that at the end of the day, while the Americans are engaged in a tariff war, in which the Chinese are a principal adversary, and there are threats that there would be cutbacks or stopping of the supplies of rare earths and minerals, the opportunities for having other avenues to maintain global supply chains are being looked at. So in other words, what we are looking at is a policy in which the US does not always necessarily win. It is a policy through which US actually has to negotiate, and I think we come up with solutions that meet the aspirations of both sides. So I think in some ways this is a good outcome for both the US and Ukraine, and for Europe as well.
So what you're saying is that the deal probably strengthens global supply chains for critical minerals, giving more options. But can the Ukraine actually help reduce dependence on China?
Well, yes, it certainly can. Of course, this is not going to happen tomorrow, because the bulk of the rare earths and critical minerals are held and processed by China. And while this particular deal includes both aspects of extraction and processing, I'm sure this is something that will take some time before it can be implemented, because in most of these cases, the current level of extraction is at very minimal levels, if there is.
And Ambassador Bhattacharya, how does the agreement actually contribute to Ukraine's post-war recovery and investment climate? Because they say it's long-term.
Well, the first thing that US would like to have done was to bring about a credible ceasefire. And I think the efforts in that are still some way short of what the desired outcomes were sought to be. Because the kind of action that was sought between Ukraine and Russia has not worked towards a ceasefire. And so unless there is ceasefire, reconstruction will be some distance away. But this does set about a certain fund and a mechanism for that reconstruction when that comes about. It also says that there is a certain economic way in which the funding of various activities can also be done. And note, there are certain things that are missing, I would think, from my initial reading of the agreement that has come about. It does not talk about the possibility of Ukraine getting into NATO. It does not talk about the denial of Ukraine getting into the European Union. But what it does not also talk about is the fact that there has to be a ceasefire before any credible movement can take place. But this is a very important incremental step in that direction. And I think it is also a signal to the Russians.
So it's clearly an economic agreement. So how serious are the challenges then of restoring infrastructure before any mineral extraction can be done? After all, half of it is destroyed.
Yes, of course. I know large parts of the areas where many of these critical minerals are present are actually currently in Russian occupation.
Right.
The control that Ukraine has over those particular reserves would not be there. But I think what this does do is that it sets the framework as to how they can go ahead. I doubt if anything is going to happen tomorrow, as I said earlier, because even this process of extraction is something that will require a mobilization of investments. But the fact that the Americans have committed to taking part in this is a positive development. Because if you look at it a couple of weeks ago, the tension in the White House was palpable, and the United States was not in a position to continue its support to the war effort in Ukraine.
So, at the end of the day, I mean, there has to be peace. But, how much of this deal was going to influence global trade, defense industries to become stronger in the region so that there is, that sort of peace, which is a positive kind of peace? So what do you look at in terms of a transition to all these developments, or even renewable energies coming forth?
Right. I think, what had come about because of the early days and the early pronouncements from the Trump administration was something that meant a severance of various old alliances and partnerships that the Americans had in the transatlantic context, and a certain new rapprochement that was being suggested with Russia. And in that particular context, if you see this agreement that has now been signed after that very interesting meeting at the Vatican between President Trump and President Zelensky, it would signal that while not everything has been undone regarding the transatlantic partnership, there are signals that they can be revived and they can be brought back to where they were. The Europeans have made various significant steps in terms of stepping up their defense commitments as a portion of their GDP, in terms of the kind of support that they would lend to the transatlantic alliance as well as to Ukraine. And at the same time, there has been a slightly different tone that has come from Russia as well. So I think on the important aspect of the conflict that is on between Ukraine and Russia, we hope that we will see some new energy in this as an outcome of this. And secondly, I think there would be much greater sense of confidence between Europe and America that they can actually work out a deal.
Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, former Secretary MEA, thank you very much for joining us with your insights and helping us to understand this minerals deal a lot better. Now moving on, let's take